Welcome to the Wine Foundry in Napa Valley. For those of you who don't know us, we're a boutique little family-owned winery which specializes in custom winemaking for private individuals and commercial, small boutique commercial brands. We also have two brands. We have one called Anarchist Wine Co., which represents kind of the creative spirit of winemaking. So trailblazing with Patrick's crazy fermentation techniques and unique varietal combinations. And then we also have our Foundry brand, which kind of embraces kind of more the traditional approach, vineyard designated wines from the top properties around Napa Valley, including Greeg Mtn Ranch. I'm really excited to be and honored to be joined by Julia and John Hinshaw, kind of the principals of Blackbird Vineyards in the OKD in Oak Knoll District, and they also happen to own Greeg Mtn Ranch, a beautiful, rich mountain Cabernet property that we've been proud to source from since 2012. We also are excited to have on hand Director of Winemaking for the Wine Foundry, Patrick Sabo. And we'll be getting to him in a little bit. I'm Stuart Ake from the Wine Foundry. Let's get started. Julie and John, so you've got Greeg Mtn Ranch, you've got Blackbird Vineyards, but let's kind of start first by kind of talking about the situation we're in. Look, I am not at the winery. I am in my family room. You are in your studio in Virginia. Patrick is at the winery, but kind of uncharted territory. How has COVID, this whole situation, how is it kind of impacting either the growing or what's going on at Blackbird?
Thanks, Stu, and cheers everyone out there from Julia and I. It's been an unprecedented time the past several weeks, and I think everybody in the wine industry is reevaluating their path forward. But for us as grape growers, it's business as usual. We've got Pina, who is the vineyard management company. They're doing all of the work that they do every year, and they've done the pruning, and we've got an early bud break, and life's looking good in the vineyard. And so that's very straightforward. We've got a relationship with the another producer, Tom Eddy, as well, and so feeling good about the vineyard. Now, Blackbird, on the other hand, the tasting room is closed per Gavin Newsom's order, and most of the wineries in Napa are also closed, but then also a lot of the restaurants that we distribute our wine to are closed. So we have doubled down on direct-to-consumer, and we're doing a lot more sales online, a lot more with our wine club members, try to make up the difference, and hoping to reopen here in the next several weeks and get Napa back going again. But most importantly, I hope all of you out there are being safe and thoughtful about your own social distancing and taking good care of your friends and family and loved ones during this unprecedented time. Julie, you want to add anything to that?
I'd say as parents, we drink at least a bottle a day, if not more. I think that direct-to-consumer sales have been up. I think that's probably a fairly common sentiment across the United States right now. Now is still a great time to be buying wine, as the temperatures haven't gotten too high in most parts of the country. So we're excited to get our wine in that we want to be drinking for the next month or two now before the temperatures rise and it's harder to ship.
So John and Julia mentioned something called direct to consumer. And I just kind of want to, there's a lot of kind of questions about what that means. So direct to consumer is, I have a bottle of wine. Don't look at this one because this is a barrel sample that was pulled a couple of hours ago. But let's say you have your bottle of wine, and then Sally in Sacramento or Santa Fe, she buys that bottle and you ship it directly to her. So if you're trying to buy from a restaurant or a retailer, that would go through a distribution chain. So just so when you hear DTC or direct to consumer, it is us, the winery, selling directly to you versus you buying it in a shop. So John and Julia, what about your journey into, first of all, we love Greeg Mtn. We're going to kind of get into that because we have many people who work with that fruit, but let's kind of get into Blackbird a little bit. What's your journey into wine, and then Blackbird Vineyard Project?
Yeah, so I'll start with a brief introduction and then turn it over to Julia, because she's really the inspiration behind the Hinshaw wine journey. Because when we met 22 years ago, Julia was already getting into the wine business. I know she was underage at the time, 22 years, but nonetheless, she worked for Remy Amérique in New York City, importing wines from Italy and other places. She worked in a wine store in New Jersey. Then we started moving around, having kids and jobs for me, and eventually landed in the Santa Cruz Mountains of California. And Julia, why don't you take it from there?
So our home in the Santa Cruz Mountains had a small vineyard, and I think it was within one of the first weeks we lived in California. We were up in Napa 2 weekends in a row, and ended up at 3 different dinners with Aaron Pott, who is the winemaker at Blackbird and consults with a number of other wineries as well. And that's when I had my aha moment of the winemaker makes a difference. So thank you, Patrick. And so we ended up investing with Blackbird really to get access to Aaron Pott, because we had this tiny little vineyard on our property down in Woodside. It was Santa Cruz Mountains. Aaron has made a lovely Chardonnay and Merlot, Santa Cruz Mountain, 1 to 2 barrels a year. I think his first and only Santa Cruz Mountain project. But then we, very long story short, we, a friend of a friend was visiting us in Woodside, said, "Oh, you guys like wine, you've got a vineyard. I'm a real estate agent up in Napa, let me take you up and we'll make this fabulous day for you. We'll look at vineyard properties, do some amazing tastings." We ended up having this amazing lunch up at Fleetwood Walker, and John was talking about how much he liked Pritchard Hill fruit. To which Latif Hasten, who was a real estate agent and became a real estate agent and a good friend, says, "Oh, Pritchard Hill? Well, I have a property not too far from there." And we ended up going to look at it the next day. We were not in the long-term retirement plan, 20 years out. We drove up to the top of the driveway and we overlooked on the valley, and we're like, we need to make this happen. Yeah. It's just, they're so
fantastic. That property, for those, I'm going to pull up a map to kind of showcase, whoops. I'll show where the property is here. So here we are. This is Napa Valley. And let me see if I can get a little drawing line. So for those of you from outside the area, accidentally I'll draw on the great city of Vallejo or Fairfield. So here we are. This is southern Napa, the city of Napa, and the property. Here's what's called Lake Hennessy. I'll zoom in just a little bit. If I can. No technology problems here. So, so basically here's Silverado Trail, and this right here is Lake Hennessy, and the property's kind of right up here, kind of on kind of heading out towards Pope Valley, and you are in. It feels like when you start kind of climbing out there, you're in the middle of nowhere.
That's right. It's very private, and even more so on our property because we are completely off the grid. We have no PG&E. We have no public utilities at all. We are 100% solar and power walls from Tesla that power the entire property. We're 100% well water that feeds the vineyards in the house. And so we, in a situation like COVID-19 or zombie apocalypse, come to our property and you will be just fine.
One of the reasons why we bought the property is if there's an apocalypse type event, this is where we want to be. So it's kind of ironic that we're here stuck in Virginia, but our hearts are there in Napa and waiting for the right time to make it back.
We'll be out there soon enough.
I'm so glad you were planning for the zombie apocalypse and that you can cook by rubbing sticks together. And there's lots of wild animals out there. So I'm glad you're feasting upon the bear and boar and rattlesnakes, which frequent that part of Napa Valley. Wait, why don't we shift into Blackbird a little bit? I love how you embrace other varieties. Like in Napa Valley, Cabernet gets all the credit, but at Blackbird you work with Merlot and Cab Franc and kind of display it proudly. And kind of one last thing with Aaron Pott, for those of you who don't know, Aaron's a very accomplished winemaker and perhaps the funniest person on the planet. Just a wacky, very, very fun and funny guy. So let's talk about Blackbird, about what you're trying to do. What do you want those wines to say?
Yes, we've actually got we got to start tonight with a bottle of Blackbird Arise. And to your point, it is 55% Merlot and 30% Cab Sauv and 15% Cab Franc. And Blackbird tends to be more right bank Bordeaux focused with the Merlot and Cab Franc. And we love Aaron. He's terrific. In fact, Julia doesn't tell the full story on Aaron. For all of you married men out there, when you see your wife sort of googly-eyed over another man, you get closer to your enemies than your friends. And so wanted to be sure that I got to know Aaron pretty well. And so there we go.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that information there.
No, but I think as you talk about the Cabernet versus the Cab Franc and the Merlot, obviously the Cab Franc is a beautiful, beautiful grape, makes amazing wines. We have a gorgeous vineyard that's planted 100% to Cabernet at this point. But the world would be a very boring place if we all walked around with the same personality. And I think you look at some of the other, I think the French have it right when, in Bordeaux, you've got your grapes that you blend. You've got your Cab, you've got your Cab Franc, you've got your Merlot, you've got your Petit Verdot in this tiny little portions that just really. So I think it's important, even when everybody's going to A, if going to the path B, which is the blending and bringing in those other amazing grapes, you have to do what's right. And I think that life deserves a little variety. And I love Aaron Pott as a winemaker. He really learned how to cut his teeth making wine in France. And so the French have this restraint, this elegance, and you pair that with the natural brightness and the ripeness of the fruit in California. And you look at, again, like a winery like Blackbird, and you really have that perfect marriage of amazing fruit, but without going over the top. You still have the restraint, you still have the elegance. And it's the wine you could drink all day, every day, which is, I think, kind of where a lot of us are right now. And my family was joking about the cocktail hour the other day. And I think I called it the less miserable hour. My brother piped in and said, "Oh, you mean any time after 10 a.m.?" And then he corrected himself and said, waking hours. I think that's appropriate.
Perfect.
A nice glass of wine any time of day kind of helps us get through where
well, cheers to that. When you talk about elegance, I'm going to kind of pivot and bring in Patrick in here, because I've had the good fortune to work with Patrick for a decade. And after Patrick graduated from Hogwarts School of Wizardry and Winemaking, he kind of followed a path through Sonoma, working with a bunch of kind of small producers there. Eventually found his way to the Wine Foundry in 2012. Patrick, look, we know that Greeg Mtn Ranch is anything but restrained the way we kind of play with it. You know, lauded winemakers like Philippe Melka, Julie and John mentioned Tom Eddy have been working with this fruit, another, you know, longtime legend in Napa Valley. But in your heart, you kind of typically kind of go for restraint. So how do you balance these things where muscle versus kind of, let's say, Jim Carrey versus Audrey Hepburn, you know, kind of, how do you balance that when you're working with a property like Greeg Ranch, but you also like to get layers and elegance?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because, you know, not, as Julie mentioned, not everyone's looking for the same results. Fortunately, you know, the blending components for Cabernet Sauvignon, including Cab Franc and Merlot, PV, or possibly Malbec as well, really are very impacting. And so the smallest amount of Cab Franc really restrains the wine and makes and elevates the aromatics and the prettiness, but at the expense of weight and length. So if you're one that would prefer more subtlety and nuance or elegance to the wine, then the smallest little addition of Cab Franc, or a large addition perhaps, makes it even more so. But certainly, you know, so the way that the Greeg Mountain fruit comes off is pretty lush and tannic. You know, so Julia and John and Stu and I are drinking the 18s currently, and the 18 is big. You know, it's got lots of tannins. However, on the back end, it's still reasonably polished, and so you can lend it towards more of that. A small addition of Stagecoach. We work with Cab Franc from the bottom of Pritchard Hill from Stagecoach Vineyard, and it's gorgeous. And you know, 1/4% sometimes, or 0.5%, or the teeniest little bit makes the wine more restrained and elegant. The opposite of that is true as well. If you didn't include Cab Franc, or you include less of it, and you include more PV and more of the Greek Cab, it's going to be bigger and more bold. So I can really kind of go in so many different directions depending on the target. You know, someone that might prefer more restraint, you know, I would say that we're going to definitely want to pull back on some of the new oak. We want to probably put it in a touch more, as I said, maybe just a touch less PV. PV is muy fuerte, and so you don't need very much to really expand the wine and increase the dimension in there as far as the length and weight. So if you're to make it big and keep the archetype of the New World kind of cab, we can easily go that direction with Malbec or Merlot and or Cab Franc. But it's a ratio thing, and it's about dialing in. So luckily, a blending time allows me to kind of tailor it accordingly. And so I would prefer, in general, to work with the highest quality cabs or the highest quality Cab Franc or whatever the vineyard is. And Greeg is spectacular. Not only did John and Julia mention that it's a stunning lookout, and you come up there, and for a few clients, lucky clients that have come up with me before, if you're out there, you would agree that there is few places like this. And so it's an amazing opportunity not only to own that, but it's an amazing opportunity to work with that fruit. And each year, as I mentioned to you earlier, so we were talking about it, it comes in just a touch earlier than it's above the fog line. It comes in reasonably early, as John mentioned. Bud breaks already happened. So the earlier you start, the earlier you finish. Now we're going to get into flowering coming up. And, you know, that's kind of where the critical time for weather particularly is. And if there's any rain or frost or other issues during flowering, that's when you might see some sort of diminished yields and things like that. But the vineyard is, even though it's at the top of the mountain, still puts out a reasonably, I'd say a reasonable amount of fruit, but you shouldn't, it is intense, and it's full body with tannins and lushness. I think it's a great combination for anyone that's looking for the New World-ish and Napa Cab. I think that you find few better examples, I'd say.
So Patrick just mentioned this thing, flowering. So when we said, so a couple of jargon things came up there. PV, when you hear PV with winemakers, it means Petit Verdot. Petit means small. Petit Verdot is anything but small. A little bit, and your hair blows off. It can be a terrible tragedy. But he mentioned flowering. So this is the next phase of the grape growing season. So we had bud break when the vines awaken from their winter slumber. And I'm going to launch a little poll here. So, and it basically says, so how are the flowers, because grapevines have these little flowers that are going to start coming out soon. How are they pollinated to produce the grapes? So, and then what I want you to do is click on an answer that you think is the appropriate one. So we have for our first potential one, either crawling and or hopping insects, such as beetles, grasshoppers, like a late model Chrysler Sebring convertible would probably also fall into that category. The next thing that would be option would be nematodes, small little creatures. Then I said hummingbirds, but it could actually be any small bird in the bird family. Then bees exclusively, would not include hornets or other stinging insects. Then we have all flying insects, which would be flies, mosquitoes, including bees, all of the above or none of the above. And we've got quite a bit rolling in already. Very exciting to see such a large audience of 100 people, which is very exciting. So I'm going to let that kind of go for a couple of minutes. You can probably move it around on your screen, and then let's jump back to John and Julia. When you guys first went up there, when you went to that property, like what was it? I know it's the remote location. You're going to be protected by zombies, but what was it that made you say what was the magic formula for it?
So I'll start. I mean, I think first and foremost, the views are spectacular. And we would invite anyone on this call who has a relationship with the Foundry to come up and see the views from the property. You are literally looking over Pritchard Hill to your left, Lake Hennessy in front of you, the Napa Valley in your distance. It is absolutely stunning. In the morning, there is a fog layer below. Usually in the evening, you get a spectacular sunset. I have never seen views like this anywhere in Napa Valley, and I miss it every day I'm not there. And it's just an incredible place. I think the views were one. I think secondly was, I mean, it's on a 151-acre property that we have total. It's 5 acres of Cabernet, but 151 acres total. So it's sort of this feeling of, in a good isolation, you know, not in sort of a complete way, but in a, you know, this is kind of our land. Not encumbered by a lot of people or noise or anything else. And so I think that's another element of it. Julia, feel free to add to that.
Well, I mean, I think, yes, the 5 acres to me was an important selling point. We always, again, in retirement years, 20 years from now, imagined ourselves being vintners of a smaller quantity that we could always kind of keep a handle on. In my mind, I always had 5 acres is that perfect quantity of grapes. But then beyond that, John will always give me a hard time for being a little bit on the woo-woo side. But the reality is, I mean, it is sacred space. You go up there and there's that sense of peace. I've done some amazing yoga and meditation up there where we have these great lavender and rosemary plants that in the summer the bees pollinate, and you can actually hear the buzzing of the bees, and it's so silent, so quiet, so peaceful that it really, if you ever needed to be centered, spend 5 minutes at the property.
Julie, I'm coming up because I usually have drive-bys in my neighborhood here, and if you see me kind of duck down, it's because my neighbors are cooking meth. Hey, I'm going to share the results of the poll right now. So again, the question was, how do the grapes become? How do the flowers become pollinated? In each flower that gets pollinated has potentially become a grape. And So nobody went for with 0% went for crawling or hopping insects, and nobody went for nematodes. My heart is broken. 13% said hummingbirds, because we know that hummingbirds do pollinate some plants. 29% went with bees. 4% just said all flying insects. 46% said all of those things do it, and 13% said none of the above. The interesting answer, surprise, surprise, Patrick Sabo, how are grapevines pollinated? And we can't have a 7-hour answer because this is like a volumetric thing. So, but how is it done?
No, it's not nematodes. No, nematodes are only in the ground. They're not, so you can't be nematodes. Turns out that the species of vines are hermaphroditic. They have both male and female, so they're self-fertilizing, self-pollinating is the correct answer. So that the flower, the male stamens, I believe, they're on the outside of the plant, and the ovary on the inside. The pollen falls right down from the same and right onto and of course creating what will be grape. And so the answer is none of the above, because it doesn't need any pollinators at all. And that's one of the most important parts. That's what I mentioned a few minutes ago. If there's any wind conditions or rain or frost or hail, that can lower the quantity of grapes, because if pollen doesn't get to the flower, then it does not fertilize. And so that's what they call, you'll have a loose looking cluster, and so you won't get a good fruit set. And so so the growers, of course, and the winemakers are both trying to get the fruit to set so that you can actually make wine from. You can't make wine from the flowers. You have to make wine from the fruit. And so we're looking for that. So the next couple of weeks, particularly coming up at Greeg, and especially wherever the vineyard is. And so, as I mentioned, it is a fairly early Cabernet vineyard. And so mostly due to the altitude and the northness of it. It's just north of, in the area there. And so it's quite reasonably warm. And so it starts early, and we're going to see it finish early as well. It'll be in September. So there you go.
It's fascinating how Greeg Mountain actually gets harvested before Pinot Noir sometimes, Yeah.
Same time, maybe, or even before.
Now,
interesting.
Sorry about that, Patrick. Go. Yep.
That's okay. I actually really like that. I mentioned to you earlier as well. I think it's kind of a neat part of logistics. Only winemakers think logistics are fun, probably, or winery logistics. But because most of the Cabernets come in late, you get there's a really tough kind of fighting for the tanks, and so tank space is critical come October. So if you have somebody that comes in September, a full month ahead of time, 2, 3, 4 weeks before, everything else, and it's kind of like the restaurant. If you go in at 5:30, you're probably going to get a table. But if you want to eat at 7:30 or 8, you're probably going to have to wait. And so it's much more difficult. And so same thing with the Cabernet fruit. So in this case, the fruit comes in early. I get my pick of the litter as far as any tank that I want, kind of thing. I could get the best logistics, and then I don't have to rush because nothing's coming in right after it. So I get to a full meal with including dessert, and because my recipe, if you will, particularly depending on the vintage, it's vintage variants, and but I need a reasonable amount of time on the skins, so I don't want to rush anything, of course, and so I don't. And so that's one of the best parts about it, is that I think it comes in early, and I'm working with Pinot Noir mostly, and I'm not even looking for the same tanks for that. And the Cabernet tanks, which are in high demand come October, have already been turned over because I came in early to eat. And so the Greeg is an early diner. And so I guess a blue plate special, perhaps.
Sure, we can definitely go for a blue plate special. So Patrick kind of said something about keeping it on the skin. So for those who don't know, so basically we go up to Greeg Mountain, we pick the grapes as whole clusters by hand. Mostly we have hobbits, and then the elves do the winemaking at the winery. And then we bring the clusters to the winery and we sort them. So we sort the clusters individually by hand. And then we have something called an optical sorter, which is this amazing thing with a series of electric eyes and pneumatic jets, which sorts the individual berries. And we put all these different parameters. Patrick puts all these parameters in there. If the berry doesn't fit within those that set that we put in there, it gets kicked out. Then we put those berries in a tank and we cool it for a couple of days, something called cold maceration. Just let things get settled, get make sure we're taking readings so we know the exact chemistry and exact sugar level, leach out some color. Then we dial up the tank, start fermenting. This is punching down the skins, pushing the skins back in because the yeast eats the sugar. The berries float to the top of the tank, but all of our color and flavors in those skins, so we have to push them back down. And then at the end, after the fermentation is done, let's say 10 days, then Patrick is going to be, although he's tasting every day, then he's doing this thing called extended maceration, where he's going to keep those skins in contact with the juice to play with the tannins and build body, build more tannins. Eventually, they'll kind of tame a little bit, but that is in effect extended maceration. Might go 30 days. But I noticed when Patrick is sipping, last week when I did a tasting online, I had a bandana, I had gloves, I looked like I was about to rob a train. Patrick has got his black gloves on, he's being safe. We're tasting, Julia, John, Patrick, and I have 2018 and 2019 barrel samples that we pulled. We pulled them yesterday morning for John and Julia, FedExed them out, and we've done the same here. We're tasting 18 and 19, 2018, 2019 samples. I hope you're digging into a good bottle at home. Patrick, are you picking up any latex on the aromatics from those gloves?
Nitrile.
Oh, nice. Very nice. Thank you. John and Julia, what are you getting when you tasted? I know you're also kind of dipping back and forth with the Blackbird, but when you're tasting the barrel samples, what are you getting on the 18s? Because we're going to be looking to blend these in a couple of months, a few months.
Yeah, so we finished the Blackbird off for dinner, so that was just sort of
okay. No wonder you're slurring your speech.
Greeg, which is phenomenal. But before I get into what the 18's doing, I'll turn that over to Julia. Let me just say that if any of you have not done a blending experience with Patrick, you need to put that on your calendar, because Patrick is the most amazing wine blender I've ever met. And we did an experience with him and about a dozen of our friends last fall, where we took the Greek fruit, and Patrick had some Cab Franc, some Merlot, some Petit Verdot. We all sort of weighed in on what should the blend be, and lo and behold, we produced an amazing wine.
Yes, and debating, I think, 2 versus 2.5% of the Petit Verdot. So yes, the smallest nuance can make a difference. So 2018, I was actually commenting to John before. It tastes a little bit meatier this year. I think there's some nice kind of iron ribeye kind of flavors to it. I think I can picture us 2 years from now. COVID's over. Got a whole bunch of people out on our back patio. We're roasting the wild boar that friends have hunted off of our property, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it in its final format.
Great answer, Bob.
And I would just add, it's bold, but it's
That
also
is
great. It's great. Yeah.
well. It is a beautiful. It's a favorite of everyone who makes wine at the Wine Foundry. Big, bold, but the fruit intensity is just incredible. Patrick, we're tasting the 18 and the 19. What would be the differences of the vintage between 18 and 19?
Yeah, well, certainly, of course, one of the challenges of tasting any wines that are in process is to realize that, obviously the 19 is 1 year younger than the 18 is, right? So you're going to get, I like the analogy of foreground and background in picture, right? So earlier on, the fruit's going to be more in your face, and the youthfulness of the fruit, the immaturity is going to be kind of right up front, and then it's going to slowly drift to the background. And complexity and oakiness and other things that were way in the background will be coming forward in the foreground. And so they'll have a similar type of results. I think that the 18, I agree with Julia, is just a touch meatier than the 19 is, just a touch bigger. The 19, I think, will also be similar, but and interestingly, I would have predicted just based on fruit volume alone, because 18 was a lot more fruit on the vine than 19. However, the 19, and so the 19 is not more concentrated. I think it's comparable, but it's, if anything, it's just a touch more restrained, I think, than the 18 is. And of course, right now you're picking up all the youthfulness on the 19 of the fruit. And so you don't see all the oak tannins, you haven't yet developed yet. So it hasn't yet kind of come to its point. So I'd say that the differences are just a touch. I think it might even be maybe just a touch prettier, perhaps, is whether you like it a touch meatier or more full-bodied, or you prefer it a touch more restrained. We might have to use slightly different blending components to get to the exact same result, perhaps. And that's a vintage variation. However, in the new world, you were mentioning France earlier. Aaron gets to get to work in France, and the conditions in France, vintage after vintage, are almost the only thing you're guaranteed is vintage variation. Where here, it is less so. There are still some differences. When you work with the same vines, even very similar conditions, you do get slightly different results. So I'd say that the results are similar. Right now, the 18 being so meaty and so powerful, it's hard to, it's an adult compared to a child, I'd say, at the moment. So the 19, it's not very fair to the 19 currently to compare it to the 18 just because of where it is. But give it another year, and then the 19 is going to be right there as well.
So let's go back to Blackbird and Julia. So a lot of people who make, so for the people who don't know, who are on here, different people make wine, custom wines at our winery, and some of them make wine just for fun with a group of friends. Other people, people kind of consider us an incubator for boutique or smaller brands. And a lot of people have a charitable or philanthropic element to their brands. And at Foundry and the Wine Foundry, we do too. We work with something called 1% for the Planet. Julia, can you kind of talk about what your role there as well with this very important element that you play with?
Well, I mean, so one of I think the really fun things about working with wine is that it's such an influencer. I mean, as a winemaker, like in certain circles, you're a rock star. And you show up and, hey, I'm the proprietor of Blackbird. People stop and they listen. And I think that you can use that influence for good. I think one of the hardest things for us is knowing when to say no, because it's like, oh, you need help, how can I help you? And I think what we look for when we're supporting organizations is we look at how are you solving the problem? And I think that there's a lot of problems out there to solve. So I think with the wine as an influencer, it gives you a platform to kind of, we lived in Silicon Valley for 6 years, and I think one of the biggest things that John and I always said is we can give money, we can give resources, but how do you influence the people around you to give as well? And I think that that's something that, being in the wine industry, I mean, you really have an opportunity there to bring other people along on the journey of giving back to the community, getting involved and taking care of your community.
Yeah, I would just add a couple thoughts to that, Stu. When Blackbird was a sponsor of many charity events in both Napa and in the Santa Cruz Mountains. So our kids were in the Woodside schools, and Blackbird sponsored those events. Auction Napa Valley, Blackbird's has been a sponsor for many years. Unfortunately, it's not happening this year. So in fact, earlier today, Julie and I were saying, let's figure out what wine do we have that we can figure out a way to auction off and still give back to the community. So I think that wine and philanthropy go very closely together. We recently launched a Blackbird Initiative saying anybody who joined the Blackbird Wine Club, we would give 20% of their wine purchases to directrelief.org. which is helping with supplies to COVID victims. Well, there you go. And there's our, wow, that's amazing. There's our Blackbird site. And so anybody who joins that wine club, 20% goes to the COVID relief at directrelief.org. So there we are.
And also, just as we're doing, I want to spotlight, Aaron Pott will be doing tastings on April 17th and 23rd with Blackbird, and you'll get a sense of the character that he is. I just want to say, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. We know these are unprecedented times. It goes without saying. You hear that at the beginning of everything, but it really is. And so very excited to be able to present with my colleague, Patrick, who makes fantastic wines, and Julie and John for carving out time from their chalkboard studio right now, not stranded in Virginia, but in Virginia. I want to say thank you. And if you're looking for a bold, beautiful, rich, opulent interpretation of Cabernet Sauvignon, the fruit that they're growing above Lake Hennessy, kind of looking Pritchard Hill, and that it is a remarkable property, Greeg Mtn Ranch. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Stu.
Thanks.